Greetings, it's your host, Gabe Morales, continuing with our true crime series. Wayne Bertram Williams is a convicted murderer and suspected serial killer who is currently serving a life sentence for the 1981 murders of two men in Atlanta, Georgia. Although never tried for additional murders, he is also believed to be responsible for at least 24 of 30 other Atlanta child murders that occurred between 1979 and 1981. Missing, endangered, and exploited children is a big problem in this country, and I will speak soon with Jim Fuda, Executive Director for Crime Stoppers of Puget Sound, about present efforts to reverse this horrible fact. And we'll also talk about school safety for our children in America. Wayne Williams was the son of Homer and Faye Williams and was born on May 27, 1958. In Atlanta, Georgia. Both of his parents were teachers. As a young man, Williams developed a keen interest in radio broadcasting and journalism. He even constructed his own radio station and began frequenting local stations WIGO and WAOK, where he befriended radio DJs and their crews and began having aspirations of becoming a pop music producer and manager. Williams first became suspect in the Atlanta murders on the morning of May 22, 1981, when a police surveillance team who were watching the James Jackson Parkway Bridge that spanned the Chattahoochee River heard a loud splash, suggesting that something had been thrown into the water from the bridge above. The first automobile to exit the bridge after the splash at roughly 2:50 a.m. in the morning belonged to Williams. When stopped and questioned, Williams stated that he was on his way to check on an address in a neighboring town ahead of an audition that he had with a young singer named Cheryl Johnson. However, both the phone number he gave police and any individual named Cheryl Johnson turned out to be fictitious. 2 days later, on May 24th, the nude body of 27-year-old Nathaniel Cater, who had been missing for 4 days and was last seen with Williams, was discovered in the river. The medical examiner ruled that he had died of asphyxiation, but never specifically stated that he had been strangled. But police believe that Williams was the person that killed Cater and that his body was the source of the sound that they heard as his car crossed the bridge. Williams failed 3 polygraph tests. Then hairs and fibers belonging to another victim, Jimmy Ray Payne, were found to be consistent with those from Williams' home, car, and dog. Co-workers told police that they had seen Williams with scratches on his face and arms around the time of the murders, which investigators believed could have been inflicted by victims during struggles with Williams. In order for some damage control, Williams held a press conference outside of his home to proclaim his innocence, even volunteering that he failed polygraph tests, which would have been inadmissible in court anyways. As I've stated many times before, they are not considered to be reliable. Williams was questioned again by police for 12 hours on June 3rd and 4th at FBI headquarters, and he was released without arrest or charges, but remained under surveillance. Williams was finally arrested on June 21st, 1981, for the murders of Cater and Payne. His trial began on January 6, 1982, in Fulton County, Georgia. During the 2-month trial, prosecutors matched a number of victims to multiple sources of fibers from Williams' home and car, on gloves, clothes, even his dog, and a very peculiar and rare type of carpet fiber. Other evidence included witness testimony that placed Williams with several victims around the time of their death. And there were multiple inconsistencies in Williams' accounts concerning his whereabouts during the time of their death. Williams took the stand in his own defense, but quickly alienated the jury by becoming very angry and combative during testimony. After 12 hours of deliberation, the jury found him guilty on February 27, 1982, of the deaths of Cater and Payne. He was then sentenced to life, and suddenly the killing stopped. In this deadly series of murders that took place in Atlanta over 4 decades ago, there was a delay in both following the evidence and conceptualizing the murder series as black-on-black crime, in particular a serial lust murder by a black suspect on black victims. Although not unheard of, this is relatively rare. Experts also point to that evidence could have led more rapidly to connecting the killer to the victims, many of whom knew each other and were often in the vicinity of Atlanta's Omnidome, where the killer is also reported to have frequented. Many point to this case being very similar to the John Wayne Gacy case in Chicago, where he lured young men many who were street kids. Now, I understand that any discussion of black on black or brown on brown crime can trigger some people, but it is a fact that most races prey on their own. Whites on white, black on black, brown on brown. The statistics bear these facts out, in spite of what people want to believe. Don't believe me? Check it out for yourself. I've made this statement before in some of my other videos concerning gangs. Brown gangs mostly shoot and victimize other brown gang members. Black gangs mostly shoot and victimize other black members. White gangs, Asian gangs, what have you, mostly victimize their own, despite the fact that they often state that they exist to protect their own race. But I'll have to save the subject of black on black and brown on brown crime for another day. If you want to know more, you could read my book, which discusses some of these very sensitive issues. Dr. John Liebert is a noted forensic psychiatrist who was the lead forensic psychiatrist during the Atlanta child murders case. And he appeared in the Ted Bundy episode on this channel, discussing the mindset of serial killers. He wrote a psychological profile that helped capture Wayne Williams. Dr. Liebert has firsthand detailed knowledge of the case and conditions the young victims endured before they were killed. Dr. Felicia Nace has worn many hats in the field of education. Like Wayne Williams' parents, she began her career as a public schools teacher, and later she held a position as an education specialist for the state of New Jersey Department of Education, as well as serving as a board trustee at a community college in New Jersey. Together, Dr. Nace and Dr. Liebert wrote the Atlanta child murders, their message today about education, politics, and race relations. Their work discusses in detail the lives and poverty of the young victims, as well as the driving forces behind such poverty, race baiting, and politics that were associated with the investigation. And these issues have not gone away. They compare hot-button issues in the late 70s and early 80s that are still relevant today, maybe even more so in our polarized society. Dr. John Liebert also assisted with solving the unsolved concerning cold cases. He believes there's a lot more serial killings that have gone unsolved than most people realize. He and an elite group of experts, the very best crime fighters in the world, to explore cold cases with renowned forensic pathologists, criminal profilers, DNA experts, with a whole slew of legendary detectives and experts of the American Investigative Society of Cold Cases.
So what we need is at least 4 regional offices. Put an FBI agent in every corner of this country, northwest, northeast, southeast, southwest. And all they do is track these guys. And then we're going to start solving some cold cases, in my opinion.
Gotcha. Thank you, sir, for coming on the program. I really appreciate it. In the late 1990s, Williams filed a habeas corpus petition and requested a retrial, but his appeal was denied. In early 2004, Williams sought another retrial, with his attorneys arguing that law enforcement covered up possible evidence of involvement of the Ku Klux Klan, and that the carpet fibers, purportedly narrowing him down as a suspect, could not stand up to scientific scrutiny.
How y'all doing? On September 4th, 1981, 3 months before his trial for 2 of Atlanta's black youth murders, Wayne Williams' attorneys asked the court for any prosecution evidence that might clear him. The prosecution said there was none. Judge Clarence Cooper agreed to study everything the prosecution had. 2 months later, after personally reviewing files of the Special Police Task Force, Judge Cooper turned over volumes of material to the defense. Nowhere was there any mention of an investigation into possible Ku Klux Klan involvement in the murders. But 9 months before, a handful of Atlanta police officers and GBI agents had begun a top-secret Klan probe known as the 8100 file. According to the file, then GBI Director Phil Peters ordered it kept secret, even from the task force, for fear that, quote, if the intelligence leaked out, it would possibly cause a race riot, end quote. But even if the task force didn't know about the Klan probe, its leadership did. According to the file, then Assistant Atlanta Police Chief Morris Redding, who headed the task force, was briefed on at least 2 occasions. He gave his approval of the operation, but later expressed doubt about Klan involvement in the murders. GBI agent Robbie Hamrick, head of the task force detectives, is quoted as saying that only he and Redding were to know of the secret Klan probe, and he would act as liaison with the task force. Then Atlanta Police Chief George Napper was also briefed on the operation and gave his approval. He is quoted in the file as saying, quote, do not let this out, end quote. If top police officials knew, what about prosecutors? About midway through the investigation, the file mentions that one of the officers involved attempted to reach an assistant Fulton County district attorney, but apparently no contact was made. The assistant DA named in the file told 11 Alive News this week that he has never been told of any Klan investigation. 2 days later, the file contains a vague reference which states, quote, "Office advised Heat, DA's office," end quote. This morning, Fulton County District Attorney Lewis Slayton, who prosecuted Williams, declined to comment on camera, but told me he didn't know about the secret Klan probe until just a few months ago, and that he has never seen the 8100 file. In a statement issued through his office today, Judge Clarence Cooper, who turned over much of the task force files to Williams' defense, said he only knew what the district attorney knew.
But a federal judge rejected his request for retrial in 2006. Williams was actually never tried for any of the Atlanta child murders. However, police believe that there were at least 22 other deaths, including those of 18 minors, linked to Williams. But Williams has continued to profess his innocence and states that he was set up.
We're forced to resort to such means as this in order to stand up for our white race and the rights of our people.
And his lawyers have called his conviction a profound miscarriage of justice. Former FBI profiler John E. Douglas wrote in his book Mindhunter that, in his opinion, forensic and behavioral evidence pointed conclusively to Wayne Williams as being the killer of 11 young men in Atlanta. He added, though, that he believed there was no strong evidence linking him to many of the other deaths and disappearances of young children between 1979 and 1981. So many people still believe that there could have been another killer out there besides Williams, or that, in fact, the KKK did copycat crimes and then try to pin it on Williams. In 2007, the FBI performed more advanced DNA tests on 2 human hairs found on one of the victims and found that the DNA evidence would eliminate 99+% of persons and even 98% of African Americans by not matching their DNA. However, the sequence found a perfect match with Williams' DNA. DNA tests were found on other victims that were later found, and the results were not conclusive. The reports also stated that there were dog hairs on some bodies that contained the same DNA sequence as Williams' dog, a sequence that only occurs in about 1 out of 100 dogs. And the FBI report stated that Wayne Williams could not be excluded in many of the other cases. Of course, many of the victims could not testify as to who their killer was. But as recently as 2019, an Atlanta man named Derwin Davis came out claiming that Williams had attempted to abduct him in 1979, but he was able to get away.
This morning, we're continuing our extensive and exclusive reports of the Atlanta child murders, where 29 children and young adults were murdered in Atlanta between 1979 to 1981. 11 Alive's Naima Abdullahi brings us a chilling recollection of a man who says he escaped Wayne Williams when he was just 7 years old.
Isaac Rogers says he's finally sharing what happened to him nearly 40 years ago. Around the same time, his brother went missing. His brother was a victim during the Atlanta child murders, and he says he almost became one.
They got the right guy. That was one of the most frightening times of my life, which automatically means you are going to be very detailed in what you're observing, and you're going to remember this person's face.
Nearly 40 years ago, Isaac Rogers says he walked to a neighbor's apartment with his 2 cousins, and as they were walking out, it turned into a nightmare.
As we got ready to exit her porch and walk down the stairs, that's when the guy that I now know of as Wayne Williams stepped from behind the wall to block us off from going down the stairs.
He says his 2 cousins got away, which left him by himself.
The only thing I could do was to turn back around, which is what I did. I went back and I started to beat on Ms. Willie Mae's door to get her to open the door.
Isaac Rogers says Wayne Williams was still approaching him when the neighbor came to the door.
Which is how I was able to tell in such detail everything he was wearing.
He says he's kept this secret for years because of fear.
I feel great now because I had a chance to share my secret with the rest of the world.
Isaac Rogers says he doesn't know if Wayne Williams killed all the victims, but he says that's his brother's killer, 16-year-old Patrick Rogers, who went missing after he walked Isaac to his school bus on November of 1980.
Yeah, it's such a shame that he was He was robbed of his potential.
Investigators say evidence connected Williams to the Atlanta child murders, but he was sentenced to life in prison for killing 2 adults. Williams wrote a letter this week proclaiming his innocence once again after the city recently announced it was re-examining evidence in the cases to bring families some closure. Isaac Rogers says he doesn't buy Williams' story.
Well, it's almost 40 years and he's still the same conniving, manipulative person that he's always been. As far as writing letters, that doesn't mean anything.
He says he's thrilled the city will now build a memorial for all the victims, a request from a grieving mother that 11 Alive brought to the city's attention.
It gives us an opportunity to know that it's documented. It will be documented in history, that the world won't forget about the travesty that took place here.
And he has one suggestion for the memorial.
That photo should be one of the main centerpieces for the memorial, so that each family will know that, hey, we grieve with you.
For more on our exclusive reports on the Atlanta child murders cases, visit 11alive.com.
Williams is serving his sentence at Telfair State Prison in Georgia and was denied parole in 2019. He will next be eligible for parole in 2027. Williams appears in several media portrayals of the case, including the 1985 television miniseries, The Atlanta Child Murders, and in the year 2000, Showtime released a drama film titled Who Killed Atlanta's Children? And there are several documentaries on the case that can be found online besides this one. It is unfortunate, but many of the surviving parents and relatives still have not received justice for the deaths of their loved ones. Hopefully one day soon that will change. I hope you found this episode to be interesting, if not disturbing. And I hope it generates some positive discussion on precautions you can take for your children, as I'm sure there are more Wayne Williams out there. For now, this is Gabe Morales signing off for Gangsters, Cops, and Politicians.